filleting knife isn't the only way to take apart fish. In this video, I'm going to show you a thick, fat knife that's going to do the job really well, maybe even better. Howdy, I'm Nathan, one of the knife nerds at Knifewear. Today we're talking about the Deba Bocho, very traditional shape of Japanese knife that's really amazing at filleting fish and even some butchery. We're going to break down what makes it so awesome, how to use it, and why you need one in your kitchen. Now, I love to catch fish and I love to eat them too, and I bet you do as well. Now, I grew up in the summers going out in a canoe on the lake with my uncle, trying to catch pike in Lake Waskesiu. And I love the process of catching fish, but taking them apart was always quite a struggle for me. I found that the flexible knife that my uncle liked to use, the really traditional bendy fillet knife, it just didn't work well in my hands. I always struggled to get a beautiful filleted fish. Years later, when I went to culinary school, they taught me how to use the same knife to take apart salmon mostly, and I still had a hard time. My salmon always came out looking kind of ugly and a bit like they had been run over by a truck. Now, the first time I picked up a Deba knife, read a little bit about how to use it, and got to work on a fish, it went almost flawlessly. It was way better than I expected. This knife has none of the bend of the knives that I was used to and was much, much taller than a European style fillet knife, but the design of the Deba combined with the Japanese technique of filleting fish quickly made this my favorite knife, made me much more efficient, much more skilled at processing fish. So what makes the Deba so good? There's a couple of things. This is a very traditional Japanese knife that we call single bevel. That means it literally has one bevel. See this section here along the edge where it's sharpened? It's only sharpened on one side. On the back side is a little bit concave. Basically flat, but just with a little air pocket on the bottom. So that means that it can cut a little bit differently, but because it's got half the angle, it's kind of twice as sharp. And that makes cutting through fish really easy and leaves a beautiful, beautiful finish on it. Now, Japanese steel, traditionally, is harder. That means it can chip more easily despite being sharper. So, the folks that designed the Deba gave it a much thicker spine in order to be tougher. So this thicker heel on the knife can be used to go in between bones and even through smaller bones without chipping the knife, but it can still have all the sharpness of a beautiful handmade Japanese blade. Lastly, this guy also has a lot more weight than a typical fish knife. So if you're working along the bones, it kind of guides itself and it can do a lot of the work for you, which I'm a big fan of. Now, there's a few different sizes of Deba you might want to get depending on the kind of fish you're going to be working with. I really like something that's kind of mid-size-ish. This is around 165 millimeters long, and this is going to be great for doing most fish. Kind of an average size salmon. You could probably do a trout with it if it's not too small. Definitely great at handling pike and any kind of mid-sized flatfish. If you are getting into really small, delicate fish, you're going to want to go for a smaller Deba, something around maybe 150 millimeters. This little guy, it's going to have a bit of trouble getting into a great big fish, but it's much lighter than the bigger guy, so it's going to give you way more control, kind of working around those bones and not removing too little meat or too much bone along with the meat. Then we're getting into the big boys, around 180, 195, even 210 millimeters long. These guys are big, and they can take a little while to learn how to control because they are so beefy. They're really quite a thick, hefty knife. Where they really excel is getting into those great big fish. Bigger salmon, halibut, possibly even a small tuna if you needed to. Usually you'd use a more specialized knife for that, but this guy can handle most big jobs really, really nicely. The other area that the medium and small Deba really excel is getting into game birds. Debas aren't just great for fish. It is what they were designed to cut, but they excel at cutting other things as well. Specifically, chickens, ducks, turkeys. Turkeys are amazing with a Deba because they're a really big bird, so having a nice big knife that doesn't get lost in the bird, it's a real benefit. And you can even get to smaller animals. If you wanted to do maybe a rabbit or a pheasant, something a bit smaller, you could do that with a small Deba. So as I said earlier, most Deba knives are single bevel, sharpened on one side, but there are also double bevel Debas, sharpened on both sides. This guy is great because it's easier to use for some folks than a single bevel knife. Single bevels cut a little bit differently, and they can take a bit of practice to get used to. This guy just cuts like a regular kitchen knife, any knife you'd be used to. And again, being a bit smaller, it's going to be great for getting into any kind of game bird, basic smaller butchery tasks, and smaller fish, of course. So I've got a nice tilapia here, and I've got this beautiful Masashi Deba that we're going to take it apart with. The Japanese method of taking apart a fish, I just find it easier and more efficient. And so for somebody that's less experienced like me, who doesn't get to handle fish all the time, it's very step by step, very, very simple. Usually results in a pretty good end product. So we're gonna start by cutting in next to the head, taking the head off, cutting it along the dorsal ridge here to separate the fillet from the spine. Then we're gonna remove the ribs on the inside, and then we're just gonna cut right down the middle and take both halves off. So we're gonna spin them around. We're gonna cut right in behind his fin and his gill here. And we're cutting in at a bit of a 45. Just essentially trying to separate the head on one side from the spine. So, cut in like so, nice and easy. Flip them around, same sort of thing. Right in behind that fin. And then we've got it more or less detached on both sides. So then we can take the heel of the Deba, which is the thickest part. So we've got the knife tucked in under the head there. We've got the heel right along the spine, and we're just going to apply a little bit of pressure. And there we go. Now we're through the spine. We can finish detaching the head. There we go. Once we've got the head removed, we're going to get to the business of taking off the fillets. So we're carefully going to find the dorsal ridge along the top of the spine there. And we're going to use the tip of our Deba just to sneak in along the left side and just gently pressing down with our thumb towards the spine of the fish, just like so. And then we're going to, after we do that cut, we're going to pull the fillet up a little bit and just follow in again along the side of that cut, just making sure we've made it all the way down to the spine there. And you can tell because the tip of your knife will knock against the vertebrae and you'll feel that texture. Then on the other side, we're going to look inside the stomach cavity and just see where the ribs connect to the spine. And just with the very tip of the knife, we're just going to gently pull those along and just carefully disconnect them from the spine. And you can hear the knife just clicking through those bones. And because the Deba is thicker, we can gently cut through those bones without any issues. Now we're going to grab both sides of the fillet and gently lift it up away from the rest of the fish and just very carefully and gently saw along the top of that spine. And you can hear the knife clicking along the top of that spine. You want to move your hand down the fish as you cut, making sure you're not running into the fillet that you've already removed from the fish. And there we go. There's one half of our tilapia. Now all we have left are these ribs on the inside of the fillet. We're going to apply gentle pressure with our left hand. Just run the tip of the knife along the underside of those ribs. We're just looking to start the cut, and rather than doing it in one big sweeping motion, we're just going to gently make small cuts, carefully lifting the knife up towards the rib cage so that we're not removing excess meat, and just following that rib cage as we go. So there you have it. Even for somebody like me that really doesn't handle a lot of fish and is a bit rusty on the technique, the fillet came off nicely. We didn't leave any bones on the fillet, but we didn't leave much meat behind on the bones either. The Deba and the Japanese method of cutting fish is really just simple and easy to do, even if you're an amateur like me. Another job that Debas really excel at is handling poultry. So I've got a basic chicken here that I'm just going to take apart with a smaller, about 150 size Deba. I like to start by removing the wings. So I'm just going to place my index finger along the spine of the Deba, and I'm going to use the tip for most of the fine work here. Just going to cut in behind the wing and then on the front of the wing like so to remove it. Really nice and easy. And because the Deba has a thicker spine, you can go through cartilage and even small bones and separate those wings without any problem. The other nice feature of the Deba is the concave back. It creates a little air pocket between the knife and the meat, and it allows it to release more easily. So when we're going down the middle here to remove the breasts, it doesn't stick at all. The chicken just falls right off of the knife. So I just like to follow along the keel bone there and just remove the meat from one side and make a small cut along the wishbone on the top of the chicken, again just to release the meat from that part of the animal. And then I can just follow all the way along the rib cage, gently pulling the meat away as I go. And because this knife is so damn sharp, because it releases really easily, it makes butchering really, really smooth and easy. Again, most of the work is being done with the front half of the knife, but once I get into some of the smaller bones and cartilage, the back half of the knife really, really shines. So as you can see, when I'm cutting in along the breast meat here, because that back edge of the knife is concave, the chicken's not sticking to it. That air pocket helps it to release really easily. It just makes the cut that much smoother and that much easier. Again, along the back side of the chicken, just drag my knife up above the oysters there. Because the tip of the Deba is curved, I can scoop those oysters out really easily. And that nice point allows me a lot of control when I've got a lot of different angles that I'm working with around the hip joint here. Again, bit of a thicker blade, can go through the cartilage on the hip joint, no problem. And voila, as you can see, the Deba is fantastic at handling poultry just as well as it deals with fish. The mighty Deba is a fantastic knife that every angler and every chef needs to try. If you work with fish, it's an absolute must. It's gonna be a little strange to use at first, but you're gonna love it. And if you're curious to see how a Deba actually gets sharpened, check out this next video. We go behind the scenes on Nauto's sharpening station. He shows us his favorite sharpening stones and he sharpens a Deba Bocho.